In 1860, the British government began constructing a ring of coastal forts around Portsmouth and the Solent, with walls designed to withstand direct hits from the most powerful naval artillery in existence. Engineers specified granite blocks, 6 feet thick, reinforced with mass concrete, and topped with iron-plated gun emplacements capable of returning fire against enemy battleships. Critics in Parliament dismissed the project as Palmerston's folly, a waste of £3 million on fortifications against an invasion that would never come. They were correct about the invasion. The forts never fired a shot in anger. Yet, 16 years later, those granite walls still stand exactly as they were built, having survived 2 world wars, decades of abandonment, and the corrosive assault of salt water that has destroyed countless modern structures. The critics are forgotten. The forts endure. Beneath this video, you will see a subscribe button, a small action with a large meaning. By pressing it, you are not only supporting the creation of more content like this, but also becoming part of a community that values permanence over convenience and preparation over complacency. The Victorian fort builders understood this principle. Build once for the worst case, even if that case never arrives. A simple subscription tells me these words reached you, that the story of engineers who refused to build for what was expected and instead built for the unthinkable mattered to someone on the other side of the screen. Like the video and subscribe to the channel, because quality, whether in fortifications or in content, deserves recognition. The Palmerston forts were a response to genuine fear. In 1858, France launched the world's first ironclad warship, La Gloire. Britain responded in 1860 with HMS Warrior, an iron-hulled battleship capable of bombarding coastal targets from beyond the range of existing shore batteries. If France could build iron warships, France could invade. Portsmouth housed Britain's principal naval dockyard. Parliament therefore approved the construction of 70 forts to defend the Solent. Most were earthwork batteries, built quickly and cheaply, but 5 were constructed as permanent sea forts, positioned directly in the shipping channel. Spitbank Fort, No Man's Land Fort, Horse Sand Fort, St. Helens Fort, and Bembridge Fort. These were not earthworks. They were artificial islands raised from the seabed, designed to function as unsinkable battleships. The engineering specifications were staggering. Each fort required foundations sunk to bedrock beneath 40 to 70 feet of water. Spitbank Fort rests upon a granite platform 240 feet in diameter. The foundation stones weigh up to 15 tons each, quarried in Cornwall, shaped by hand, transported by barge, and lowered by crane into position on the seabed. Work proceeded only in calm weather. Progress was measured in feet per month. Above the foundations, walls were built from granite blocks, faced with Portland stone and backed with mass concrete. The walls rise 40 feet above high tide, with thicknesses ranging from 6 to 12 feet at the base. Contemporary military manuals suggested that 3 feet of masonry could stop shells from 1860s naval guns. The forts were built with double or triple that thickness. Engineers calculated worst-case scenarios, direct hits from the heaviest guns, multiple impacts on the same section, prolonged bombardment. The walls were designed to absorb punishment no fort would ever ace. Each fort housed 60 to 80 men, with magazines, cisterns, living quarters, kitchens, and multiple gun emplacements. The roofs were vaulted brick arches, reinforced with iron beams, designed to withstand plunging mortar fire. Gun positions were protected by wrought iron shields, 6 inches thick. No detail was left to chance. No worst case was too extreme. Construction costs exceeded every estimate. Spitbank Fort alone cost £462,000, roughly £60 million in modern terms. Total expenditure for all 70 forts approached £3 million. Critics in Parliament attacked the expense relentlessly. Lord Palmerston defended the project on the principle that Britain's survival depended upon naval superiority and coastal defence. If France invaded, the cost would be irrelevant. If France never invaded, the cost was insurance. Parliament continued funding. The forts were completed between 1867 and 1880. By the time the last was finished, the threat had faded. France and Britain had become allies. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 showed that France's enemy was Germany, not Britain. Naval technology had advanced beyond the fort's design limits. Rifled artillery with explosive shells could penetrate the 6-foot granite walls that had been invulnerable to smoothbore cannon. The forts were obsolete before they fired their first practice round. Yet construction was not reversed. The forts remained armed and garrisoned, maintained at great expense and periodically updated with new artillery. During the First World War, they served as observation posts and anti-submarine bases. During the Second World War, they housed anti-aircraft batteries defending Portsmouth from German bombers. Their guns never engaged enemy warships, but their presence served a purpose beyond their original design. Symbols of preparedness, of commitment to defense, and of a refusal to assume peace would last. The post-war period brought decline. The Royal Navy abandoned the forts in the 1950s. Maintenance ceased. Salt air corroded iron fittings, waves battered granite, seabirds occupied gun emplacements. For 30 years the forts sat empty, massive stone structures serving no function. Owned by the Ministry of Defense but ignored by planners who saw no value in maintaining fortresses built for a war that never occurred. Then developers rediscovered what Victorian engineers had created. In the 1980s, entrepreneurs purchased Spitbank Fort and No Man's Land Fort from the government for nominal sums. Surveys revealed the structures remained fundamentally sound despite decades of neglect. The granite showed no serious deterioration. The concrete backing was intact. The vaulted brick ceilings had not collapsed. The foundations had not shifted. Victorian engineers had built fortifications to withstand battleship bombardment. Those fortifications easily survived abandonment. Spitbank Fort reopened in 2012 as a luxury hotel. The 6-foot granite walls intended to stop French shells now contain 9 guest rooms, a restaurant, a rooftop hot tub, and a sauna. Gun emplacements became viewing platforms. Ammunition magazines became wine cellars. The structure that once cost £60 million to build for war now generates revenue from tourism. No Man's Land Fort followed a similar path, converting into a private venue for events and overnight stays. Horse Sand Fort is under renovation. St. Helens Fort houses a maritime museum. Bembridge Fort is owned by the National Trust. All share a level of structural integrity that exceeds almost anything built with modern materials for similar purposes. The comparison with modern coastal defense is revealing. During the Cold War, Britain constructed radar stations and missile batteries along the coast. These were thin-walled, steel-framed buildings designed for 20-year service lives. Most have been demolished. The few that remain suffer advanced deterioration, corroded steel, crumbling concrete, and structures too costly to renovate because they were designed for replacement, not permanence. The Victorian forts were built on the opposite assumption. Replacement was impossible. A fort built on an artificial island in a shipping channel could not be demolished and rebuilt each generation. It had to function indefinitely, or not at all. Engineers therefore designed for survival. Materials that would not corrode, walls thick enough to absorb damage, and foundations deep enough to reach bedrock. The irony is striking. Forts built to withstand a French invasion never saw combat. Walls designed to stop battleship shells never faced bombardment. Yet the expense critics mocked produced structures that outlasted every temporary alternative. A fort built in 1867 for a war that never came remains sound in 2024. Coastal installations built in 1967 for wars that did occur have already vanished. The mathematics tells the story. Spitbank Fort cost £60 million and has required minimal maintenance over 157 years. A modern equivalent would cost £100 million and need replacement every 50 years. Over 157 years, that is 3 replacements. £300 million versus £60 million. The Victorian fort costs 1/5 per year of service. The lesson extends beyond forts. The same thinking that produced 6-foot granite walls produced 4-foot mill walls, 3-foot sewer tunnels, and 30-foot viaduct foundations. Victorian engineers consistently overbuilt because they understood the future was unpredictable and replacement was costly. Better to invest heavily once than rebuild repeatedly. Lord Palmerston died in 1865, before the last forts were completed. He never learned that the French invasion he feared would never happen. Yet he built knowing they might not be needed. The expense was justified by possibility, not probability. If Britain were invaded, the forts would save the nation. If not, they would stand as insurance. The engineers who designed them understood this logic. They were not building for the war they expected. They were building for the war they could not predict. Granite walls, 6 feet thick, could stop any shell in 1860, and many that would be invented later. Designing only for known threats was insufficient. Designing for unknown threats required overbuilding. This was not wasteful excess. It was responsible engineering in the face of uncertainty. Critics assumed the future could be predicted. Engineers assumed it could not. History proved the engineers right. Today, the sea forts remain visible in the Solent. Massive granite structures, weathered yet intact, serving purposes their builders never imagined. Spitbank hosts wedding parties. No Man's Land accommodates corporate retreats. Victorian engineers built for permanence, not short-term function. The role changed, the structure endured. The forts also show that overbuilding creates resilience. Built for battleships, they survived bombers, erosion, neglect, and commercial conversion. None of this was imagined in 1860, yet thick granite and deep foundations handled it all. Overbuilding for one threat created capacity to survive many others. This is the forgotten lesson of Victorian engineering. Building to minimum standards creates structures fit only for expected conditions. Building beyond standards creates structures able to face the unexpected. The forts were never attacked by French battleships, but they endured challenges no engineer foresaw, because those engineers refused to optimize for comfort. Critics called it waste. Accountants called it folly. Time calls it foresight. The Palmerston forts remain in the Solent, built for a war that never came, surviving everything that did. Monuments not to Victorian paranoia, but to Victorian wisdom. The wisdom to admit the future cannot be predicted, and therefore should never be underestimated.